first witness for a moment.
Yeah, do you want to show Mr. Blasier
Yes.
first look source you have there? You bet.
Sure. Sir, is it, did Mr. Fisher in his book say that unless it is unavoidably necessary, and then emboldened, do not examine a crime scene outdoors until good daylight prevails? Is that what he said?
Right.
So you disagree with Barry Fisher?
No.
Now, sir, with respect to summonsing the coroner, do you believe that when the coroner is summoned is an issue that is subject to local custom? In other words, it differs from one place to another?
I suppose that's obvious. The customs vary.
Do you agree with the proposition that whether the medical examiner or coroner should be contacted as soon as the investigation begins is a matter of local custom? That many agencies wait first for the investigating officers to arrive and begin their investigation prior to notification of the coroner's office. Do you agree with that?
Do I agree that that's a practice?
Yes.
It is a practice, yes.
And do you agree that or is that an acceptable forensic practice, if you know, insofar as Barry Fisher is concerned?
Here in L.A. County?
Yes.
That's a difficult question to answer. If that's their practice here in L.A. County, then that's what they do. And I agree with him saying that that's what they do here in L.A. County. I don't agree with the concept.
Well, do you agree with the concept that one should let a detailed examination of the body wait until the basic examination of the scene has been completed? Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, so obviously, if you have to wait until the crime scene has been completed, then the coroner is simply going to have to stand around waiting for an extended period. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. If they make their preliminary examination, which they should do, as soon as possible, and then have other things they can do rather than wait for 5 or 6 or 10 hours, however long it takes, and then return and do their detailed, as that refers to, detailed examination.
Well, as soon as they enter the crime scene, didn't you say there was the possibility of items being disturbed?
That's true, but as the first officer and the first investigator and the medical examiner, they have to enter the crime scene, but they have to be trained how to enter the crime scene to do the least possible damage.
But do you believe that there are many people within the forensics community that believe that the coroner should be kept out of the crime scene until the scene is processed?
Do I believe that? Yes, I do.
Okay. And if that is the case, would it be reasonable to call the coroner later on in order not to have them waiting for an extended period?
I don't agree with the term reasonable, but I understand the practice.
Okay. Now, do you agree that the first officer at the crime scene, after having established that that a death has occurred and making a cursory inspection, should notify his superiors and the appropriate people that a homicide has occurred?
Yes.
Sir, do you agree that it is advised that the telephone be used rather than police radio to accomplish this, as it is not uncommon for the press and other news sources to monitor police radio frequencies? Do you agree with that?
You said the telephone, I agree, a telephone.
Okay, well, you want to take a look at what Mr. Fisher has to say on this?
No, I agree with that. You said the telephone, which is vague to me.
May I approach the witness?
I think, let's not spend a lot of time on that.
Okay. And did you hear the testimony in this case as to why the officer discovering the body decided to decided to use the telephone as opposed to a radio?
I don't remember specifically that answer, but that's not the point that I'm trying to make.
And sir, is it your understanding with respect to the telephone in this particular case that outgoing calls would destroy any information contained within that telephone as to the most recent call, or incoming calls?
The specifics of that phone, I don't know either.
Okay. Now, with respect to the eyeglass envelope and the other items that were in the threshold area between the walkway and what we've referred to as the caged-off area, you know what I'm talking about?
I think so.
With respect to the eyeglass envelope, would one concern be, if it were in fact not moved prior to when the bodies were taken out of the crime scene, that any blood pattern on the eyeglass envelope could have been changed?
I would expect it to be changed if they move the body out while it's still there.
And therefore, any reconstruction that could be done on the basis of the envelope itself would probably would be less meaningful. Is that correct?
It would require some more interpretation.
Okay. And would you also say that if there were impression evidence on that envelope, and that was the only place at the crime scene that you had impression evidence, that impression evidence might be less probative as a result of the activities that occurred?
Less probative?
Yes.
Rephrase the question.
Would it be your estimation that impression evidence, if that were the only impression evidence that you had, would be less usable for forensic purposes for subsequent analysis?
Oh,
It would raise questions about the marks. I mean, I'm assuming that there's photographs before. I've seen photographs before while the remains of the victims were still there.
Okay.
And any change would, if there was any change due to moving the bodies, could be accounted for.
all right, Mr.
No.
Goldberg, I need to take had a request here for a brief comfort break. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a 10-minute comfort break. Remember all my admonitions to you. Mr. Ragle, you can step down and come back in 10 minutes. All right. All parties are again present. We ready?
Yeah, there was one matter that we wanted to address the court
All right.
about can we approach.
Jury's not here.
Well, it was about Mr. Ragle's testimony. But thank
All
you.
right. All right, let's have the jurors, please. All right, the record should reflect that we've been rejoined by our jury panel. Mr. Larry Ragle is again on the witness stand undergoing cross-examination by Mr. Goldberg, and Mr. Goldberg, you may continue.
Mr. Ragle, with respect to the interior of the condominium at Bundy, were you aware of the testimony that inside the condominium there was no ransacking, there were no footprints that were found, shoe prints, no blood, no evidence of any struggle, no evidence of a break-in, and that there were items that were checked with the phenolphthalein test and no blood was discovered? Were you aware of all those things?
I was aware of everything except the last thing you mentioned.
Well, did you talk to Dennis Fung and Andrea Mazzola in this case before getting up on the stand to criticize the crime scene investigation?
Did I talk to them? No,
Yes.
I didn't.
Now, you also testified, sir, that there was a possibility that the blood vial placed in a evidence envelope in a trash bag could have broken. Is that correct?
It's in danger, yes.
Is there any evidence whatsoever that the blood vial actually did break?
No,
Is there any evidence that it cracked?
not that I'm aware of.
So wouldn't you agree that the whole issue is completely irrelevant to this case?
That's a legal conclusion, counsel.
Now, are you aware, sir, that with respect to the items at the Bundy location, there were photographs that were taken before and after photographs, if you will, documenting where the objects were originally and then where they were moved to? Is that correct?
I've seen 2 sets of photographs, yes.
And in fact, the only reason that you know that objects at the Bundy location were in fact moved is because of the before and after photographs. Is that true?
That's correct.
Now, Mr. Ragle, do you agree that there are no hard and fast rules for successful crime scene processing?
I don't agree with that, no.
You don't. So if Professor DeForest, Lee, and Gansland said that there are no hard and fast rules for successful crime scene processing, you disagree with them, is that correct?
Yes.
And don't you think that they all have a little bit more experience as criminalists than you do?
Sustained.
Do you think that Dr. Henry Lee has more experience as a criminalist than yourself?
Argument of no
Over.
foundation.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't really know. I don't know how, what he does. He certainly has a lot of experience, but that doesn't mean that I have to agree with everything he says.
And, sir, is your highest degree in criminalistics a bachelor's degree?
That's correct.
Now, do you think that Dr. DeForest has more experience in crime scene investigation than yourself?
I have no idea what his experience is. He is, I believe...
You've never heard of him?
Oh, I know. He went to the same university.
Okay.
I just don't know what his experience is.
And, sir, have you ever written a book that is a leading textbook in the area of forensic science?
No, I haven't.
And the chapter that you wrote is not contained in a book that's considered to be a leading textbook, is that correct?
I don't consider it a leading textbook.
In fact, to your knowledge, is that book not even contained in the library at the Orange County Sheriff's Department Criminalistics Laboratory Library?
I can't find it.
Now,
It was.
they haven't replaced it.
It's out of print.
Now, sir, do you also agree with respect to the issue of crime scene processing that, of course, perfection in this or any other human endeavor is never achieved? It is probable that no crime scene has ever been processed in such a way that hindsight would not allow someone else to criticize the work at a later date. Do you agree with that?
I'm sure there's some truth to that.
Okay. And that's what you're doing here, is that correct?
That's correct.
And, sir, is it a correct statement of the record in your testimony in this case that it's been 19 years since you've actually been in the field as a criminalist and processed a crime scene?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I have nothing further.
Mr. Blasier?
Mr. Ragle, Mr. Goldberg asked you several questions about whether you'd processed any crime scenes since 1989. Did you retire in 1989?
Yes, I did retire in 1989.
Would there be any reason why you would be processing crime scenes after you retired from the Sheriff's Department?
Not that I can help it.
Now, he also asked you whether you personally processed any crime scenes from 1976 to 1989. Let me ask you this. Were you in charge of people who were processing crime scenes during that period of time?
Yes, I was.
Were you, as one of your responsibilities, involved reviewing their work in processing crime scenes?
In certain types of cases were reviewed, yes.
And in the cases that were reviewed, can you give me a rough estimate of how many crime scene processing cases you've reviewed since between 1976 and 1989?
I really can't give you a number. There are two types of reviews that I was involved in. One would be a periodic review of a homicide where everybody in the laboratory participated, and it was more of a critique and learning experience. On a daily basis, I met with the chief deputy coroner and the chief forensic toxicologist, and on occasion, the chief forensic pathologist, and reviewed cases for their completeness in terms of the issuing of the death certificate. So that included scenes crimes, that included natural deaths, that included other types of deaths, suicides and accidental deaths. And that happened anywhere from 2 to 8 cases a day for the entire time that I was the director. So I'd have to have a calculator to figure out how many cases that involved.
Are we talking thousands of cases? Or at least hundreds?
Hundreds.
Now, you were asked about certain textbooks, and you mentioned references to several journals. I think you mentioned the American Journal of Forensic Sciences and the Forensic Society Journal from England. Do you subscribe and keep up with those journals?
The journal that is published by the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, yes, I subscribe to that, and as part of the membership in the California Association of Criminalists, you receive the British Journal.
And do those journals contain articles about new techniques and state-of-the-art techniques used in crime scene processing?
In part, yes.
Do textbooks typically keep up to date on state-of-the-art or new techniques used in processing crime scenes?
Textbooks are revised periodically, and so the latest edition would have techniques that had been developed since the previous edition. So they are updated, yes.
Now, you were asked, I'm sorry.
I was going to say they're not as current as the journals.
You were asked some questions about walking into a crime scene and not wearing gloves if you were not getting close to the evidence. Is one of the important considerations that you've looked at in this case is whether or not people should be walking in the crime scene in the first place?
Yes.
Can you think of any legitimate investigative or forensic purpose served by a police officer going into the crime scene to have his picture taken, pointing out exhibits?
Sustained.
Now, you asked some questions about gloves and the original purpose for wearing protective gear such as gloves, hats, and protective footwear. And I believe you testified on cross-examination that originally that was because of to prevent communicative diseases being picked up at a crime scene, correct? Are there new purposes that now exist for wearing that kind of protection?
I mentioned the evolution of that, and yes, there's more concern now with the samples that are being handled for certain types of tests where trace amounts of materials are going to be detected.
And does that relate to PCR testing where small materials are amplified?
Yes.
Do you know of any reason why you could not remove a blood stain from a tile surface by scraping?
Vegas to what kind of tile?
It's a stain.
Well, are you familiar with, have you tried to remove blood stains from tile surfaces?
It's just, counsel, we have different types of tile involved here. You have glazed tile, you have Mexican paver tile that are porous, different types of surfaces, so your question is ambiguous.
Have you, are you familiar with removing blood stains from tile surfaces with porous types of tile?
I don't have any specific recollection of that type of crime scene that I personally was at.
Now, you were asked some questions about waiting until daylight hours to process a crime scene. Did you indicate in your direct testimony that you should, that a crime scene should be processed during the nighttime, entirely processed?
Not entirely. What I indicated is that there are a lot of things that can be done because it is dark. It is advantageous to do certain types of things in the dark.
Is there any legitimate investigative or forensic reason to not call a criminalist when you have a crime scene that's at the nighttime?
No.
Is there any legitimate investigative or forensic purpose for, when you're dealing with small blood stains, to not remove the entire stain?
There is no reason not to remove the entire stain. You know, as much as physically possible.
Now, you were asked some questions about the practice in Los Angeles County to not call the coroner for whatever period of time. Do you agree that with that, well, let me rephrase that. Do you have an opinion on whether or not that is a proper practice?
In my opinion, it is not a proper practice.
You were asked a question about use of the telephone. Do you know of anyone, any textbook, any source, any police source whatsoever that would suggest that where you have a crime scene with a victim murdered outside her front door, that it's okay to use her phone to call in the station?
I don't know if anybody would recommend that or if any printed recommendation.
You were asked to review a portion of Dr. Lee's book, page 245. I'd like you to look at this again.
What mistakes the evidence as to whose blood it is?
Yes.
Mr. DeForest, Mr. Jensland,
Jensland.
and Dr. Lee. Let me show you page 245 and ask you to look at the top part of the page prior to the paragraph you were asked to read. What is your understanding of what that is in that particular paragraph, of the first part of the paragraph that was read to you? What does that apply to?
It applies to blood that is still wet or clotted. And it indicates that this blood is easier to type than dry blood.
Does that refer to any type of stains that have already dried and then the police make them wet?
Well, it calls for a conclusion speculation. You can read what's there.
Overruled.
May I read?
Mr. Blasier, ask your next question.
Does that refer in anywhere on that page or in that section to stains that are already dry that the police make wet by virtue of the way they use, the method they use to collect the blood?
One moment.
Sure.
No, it does not.
Now, I would like to read to you the last part of that paragraph that Mr. Goldberg read you the first part of and ask you if you agree with this. Careful documentation of a crime scene is essential before...
Beyond the scope,
Overruled.
documentation.
Careful documentation of a crime scene is essential before beginning to collect evidence. Without documentation of what samples came from where, the serological results will not be of much help in reconstructing the event. All samples should be placed in appropriate containers and carefully labeled. Blood evidence should be taken to the laboratory as soon as possible after it is collected. The older a dried stain becomes, the fewer are the individualizing characteristics that can be tested for in the samples, and the less information will be obtained. Storage of dried blood samples at refrigerator or freezer temperatures often greatly extends the period of stability and thus typability of the genetic marker systems. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Now, you're asked a question about the fact that there are two sets of photographs which reveal that some pieces of evidence, specifically the envelope and the glove, were moved at some point. Recall that?
Yes, I recall that.
Do the fact that there are two sets of photographs assist you in any way whatsoever in determining how they got from one position to the other, whether or not they were picked up and placed in a new position, or who did that?
The photographs do not. No.
Have any materials been provided to you at all indicating that any effort was ever made to try and make that determination?
I have not seen any documentation at all.
That's all I have.
Mr. Goldberg?
Just one.
Already wrote recross on my notes.
Mr. Ragle, would you expect that a trained criminalist would be able to see blood stains on the outside of the Bronco
Beyond
door?
the scope.
Overruled.
In examining the Bronco on the 14th, would be able to see if there were any blood stains on the outside of the door toward the bottom?
Assumes facts, not evidence.
Sustained.
That's all I have.
Sir, are you prepared to cite to this jury any reference in the forensic science literature for the proposition that items should always be air dried at the scene when the cloth swatch technique was used to collect a dry stain?
Am I prepared to tell you where to look this up? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
A
can you?
Printed reference?
Did you bring a citation with us where you can say, this person on this date and this journal wrote that when you use the cloth swatch technique, you must always air dry at the scene?
I don't know of any. What we just read in Dr. Lee and the other author's books, I think said that, and I believe there was something in the book you read from Barry Fisher.
Well,
But
can
I don't
you-
know if
Can you
it's-
point out for us where?
Wait. You guys are talking at the same time. Let him finish his answer.
Okay.
I don't know if it used the word always.
In fact, they said sometimes, right? That was the only word that they used with respect to air drying, that sometimes you should.
And I believe when you asked me that question before, when you said sometimes, I said it depends on the timing and the circumstances.
Okay, now what I'm asking you, and I'll ask you again, is can you cite for us a single reference that specifically says that when you use the cloth watch technique at a crime scene to collect a dried stain, you must air dry it at the scene?
No, I don't have any specific reference.
And would you agree, sir, also with the proposition that if we look at the forensic science literature and the textbooks as to how a crime scene should be processed, that we could find a variety of opinions on a variety of issues?
Not the basics. In various, I'm sure various authors under certain conditions would recommend some things, but the basic things that I indicated when we began this morning, I believe there were 5 basic rules, and I call those rules, absolutely required functions that must be done at a crime scene, always have to occur. If they don't, you have a faulted crime scene.
Exactly. Those 4 things must occur.
5.
But 5. But I thought you said 4. Recognition, collection, packaging, and then what was the final one that you'd mentioned?
Documentation and preservation.
Okay.
Preservation.
All right. As to the items that you referred, although we can find references to those 5 categories being musts, in terms of how to perform each one of those 5 categories, can we find differences between recognized forensic scientists in the literature?
I'm sure that if you look at enough different books, you would find some variations, but they're all focused towards the same common goal, and that is to get the most information from the crime scene and to preserve the evidence.
Of course. But we could find some variation in terms of how best to document the scene, couldn't we?
Well, I don't know who brought it up, but the videotaping is an example.
Right.
Some departments prefer to do still photography and videotaping.
And some don't do either, right?
Oh, I don't know any that doesn't photograph.
At small crime scenes, there are some that don't take any photographs. aren't there?
In malicious mischief type of crime scenes, yeah.
Or even in some low-grade felonies. Isn't that true?
Not particularly relevant to this case.
Well, sir, isn't it also true that in the area of identifying how best to identify evidence at a crime scene in terms of the techniques to use, there may also be some variation in the forensic literature?
I don't understand the first part of your question.
In terms of what specific techniques to use in order to find evidence at a crime scene, there are some differences in the literature, aren't there?
Vague. He needs to talk about a specific
I
project.
think we've sort of gone around this for a while.
Yes, Your Honor, there was one other thing that I wanted to get into, but it would require us to approach.
All right, sidebar. right, Mr. Goldberg, with alacrity.
I will.
Thank you.
I want to mark as people's next in order what appears to be a photograph of the witness.
589.
And I wrote 589 on the rear. May I put that on the Elmo, Your Honor? Oh, it seems to be washed out. Can we get... Sir, on August the 26th, while we're waiting for them to focus on this photograph, you participated with the Los Angeles Police Department in a search at the Keystone tow facility that involved the Bronco. Is that correct?
On August 26th, yes, I did.
We can't get any better than that. And sir, in this photograph, can you see yourself leaning into the Bronco?
Yes.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, maybe we could just pass this around after I finish my questions.
No, I don't think so.
As you are leaning into the Bronco, sir, is your hand in very close proximity to the rear of the console that's still in the Bronco?
Yes, it is.
Are you aware that that console was removed from the Bronco on this date and that it was subsequently subject to PCR testing?
Yes.
Are you wearing a glove?
No, I'm not.
Are you wearing any lab coat?
Well, that's a shirt.
Are you wearing any hairnet?
No, I'm not.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Mr. Ragle, were you processing the Bronco for any evidence yourself that day?
No.
Touch or grab the console in any fashion?
No.
Were you being closely watched by police officers as well as Michelle Kessler
Yes.
during the entire time?
Yes.
No further questions.
All right, Mr. Ragle, you may step down. Thank you very much, sir. Tomorrow morning? All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our recess for the afternoon at this point. However, before we do that, I just wanted to bring up one matter. Mr. Bancroft.
Yes, sir.
3 times today, I noticed the camera moving, and I observed on 3 occasions jurors looking up at the camera as it was moving because of the amount of noise it's making. So it either needs to be lubricated and quieted down, because if it's distracting the jurors by it swinging back and forth, it's going to go.
Okay.
All right. Anything else, counsel?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, as far as the jury is concerned, then, please remember all my admonitions to you. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves, form any opinions about the case. Don't allow anybody to communicate with you with regard to the case. Don't conduct any deliberations until the matter has been submitted to you. See you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. All right? Thank you, counsel.